Welcome to Occult of Personality, Esoteric podcast extraordinaire. I'm Greg Kaminsky. Now, in episode number 224, we're joined by the man behind ARCANVM podcast and YouTube channel, Ike Baker. Ike Baker is an author, content creator, practicing ceremonialist, and senior initiate of several lineages within the Western esoteric traditions, including the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Martinist Order of America, and Freemasonry. With 20 years of study, training, and practice, Ike is also a traveling lecturer, instructor for multiple premier educational organizations, including the Institute for Hermetic Studies. He hosts the ARCANVM YouTube channel and podcast where he produces presentation-style videos on the occult and esoteric and converses with some of the foremost practitioners, scholars, and authors in the fields of magic, esotericism, and the occult. This was a really fun interview because Ike and I got to delve deeply into what the spiritual path entails and requires of us, and we got quite philosophical and contemplative as we did so. It was great to speak to a fellow podcaster who's so prolific and has a great depth of experience, along with a longing to aid his companions on the path by providing us with such excellent lectures, interviews, and a presence that entices us to learn more and become better than we are. I fully support ARCANVM and Ike Baker's work. Hearing him talk about it was a privilege. Occult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership website, who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. Thank you again. Because of your support, we're able to bring you recordings of this caliber and many more to come. Ike Baker, I want to welcome you to Occult of Personality podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thank you so much, Greg. It means a lot, and it's kind of a huge deal for me. I've been a big fan for a really long time.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to hear that, and I appreciate it. So to kick things off, maybe for the people listening who don't already know you and your work, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Sure. Well, my, main bread and butter is Western ceremonial magic. I've been in one form or another in those traditions through, I guess you would call them the initiatic lineages of Western ceremonial magic, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I've been doing that in one form or another for about 19 years. And so I kind of recently decided to start a podcast and a YouTube channel, just with like this overwhelming amount of information and interest in things like ceremonial and the occult from the Western perspective. I felt like I could contribute something, of value rather than just noise. And it took me a really long time to kind of get the confidence to do that. But I feel like what I attempt to do with my podcast specifically is kind of mirror what, you've done for many years and have serious practitioners who kind of straddle the line of research, scholarship, authorship, and then also, they're practitioners. A lot of them, most of them, I would say like 95% are serious practitioners. I think it's really important to cultivate a space where that's the overarching sort of commonality between people having this discussion, especially with the fact that I don't want to come off as too curmudgeonly or anything, but I feel like there's this academic thing that's kind of planting its flag right now. And I want to just provide a resource, another one, for people that are serious about the practice as well. And what I try and do on my channel is combine both of them, right? Because neither of them are bad. They're both, I think, two sides of one coin, really, two aspects of one whole thing. So, and it's traditionally, it was that way. There was a tremendous amount of serious erudition that went into practicing the ceremonial traditions in the West. And so I attempt to straddle both. And what I hope to do, really, I hope that I'm accomplishing to one degree or another, is to impart insight along with the historical context, and they supplement each other, they corroborate each other, and really fill out the whole profile to me. So that's what I do. I've got a YouTube channel, and I've got a podcast is on YouTube as well. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and I've been doing a blog and just trying to create as much content that is curated and of solid quality for everybody for as long as I can go without falling down. So, but all that's at ikebaker.com. Real simple. You can watch, listen, read all of it.
Awesome. I've been really enjoying following your work because I felt like you have a level of erudition, professionalism, like it's super interesting. I think mostly because you're super interested in it. And so that comes across in your writing and in your podcast and talking with you. Like I can feel that. And you said something just now that I felt was a little provocative, maybe. And I'm curious about it. You said this idea of like academia kind of planting its flag, which implies that academia, or let's say the academic study of Western esotericism, is kind of encroaching on territory that may not have been previously theirs and somehow trying to take that over. And I'm wondering if you can say more about that.
Well, I don't think, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that. It's actually like my mission statement is to talk about that. But the thing is, it's, I went to just about every kind of university. I've been to state university. I've been to private college. I've been to community college, and I've been to trade school. So I've gotten kind of a whirlwind tour, or a very thorough tour of the, I want to say, academic spirit or culture of the last 20 years. And, I think to kind of quote somebody else or paraphrase Walter Hanegraaff, his book, Western Esotericism, A Guide for the Perplexed, right? That is a wonderful book. And it's actually, that has been, it's been a kind of inspiration for my own work, except that, he is self-admittedly not a practitioner. And so that's kind of the tack that I'd like to supplement that kind of work with practitioner insights for people who are kind of trying this anyway, right? They're going to do it anyway. So the thing for me is that he kind of talks about in the beginning of that book about how, like, after the Enlightenment, you're not allowed to really talk about this stuff anymore in academia. It was not taken seriously. It was kind of very slowly and quietly shoved off the table in a lot of aspects. And, I see that it's becoming, specifically at the, for instance, at the university that he teaches at. And is a great example of how it's coming back to the fore of academic study, and it's being taken very seriously. Actually, I was having a conversation with Rudolf Berger recently, and he remarked, he's like, you could, for a long time, there was this kind of, maybe it was unspoken rule, I'm not sure what it was, but if you did study this stuff, you could not be a practitioner because you'd be viewed as biased. You couldn't talk on this stuff as impartial. So, I haven't necessarily experienced any of that in my because I was going to school for different things. I went to school for journalism and music. I tried a bunch of stuff out. So, but I did feel this kind of overwhelming positivistic culture that was based kind of, you had to really toe the line pretty much everywhere I went. That you were kind of rewarded for taking, at least espousing or supporting that overarching worldview. And there was, I don't want to say a kind of like punishment, but certainly a demerit for trying to entertain the idea in a scholastic environment that, well, subjective experience is kind of what magic is all about. It's at least 50% of the art. So we need to not kind of dismiss that as irrelevant. It's from a practitioner point of view, I mean, it's at least, as relevant as the objectifiable, I guess, whatever can be considered empirical in the practice of magic and its history. But so, I actually stole that quote from Gary Lockman. Gary Lockman actually was the one who said specifically, he wrote somewhere online that he felt like academia was planting its flag. And I heartily agree at this point. Now, who knows what's going to happen in the next 10, 15, maybe sooner, 5 years, now that people are able to be sort of practitioners, at least more so. And it's at least from what I hear, from what I understand, it's becoming more tolerated in certain circles, academic circles. So, I mean, but my apprehension towards that is not necessarily the fact that people are studying this. It's just that you have something that is an institution, right? I mean, the university system is somewhat of the sole repository for, I guess, what many people consider viable information, and you don't necessarily, you want to be able to talk about magic and talk about the occult, particularly as a practitioner. You want to be able to talk about it outside of the strictures or confines that of the, that the prevailing worldview sort of intincts an organization with. And that's really, really important. So there's going to be tons of people out there that are very, very kind of hands off of that side of the thing. And that's fine. But I want to provide a space for people to come and you don't have to feel crazy that about believing this stuff. In fact, belief is it's a huge part of what we do. And so that's really more kind of like what I mean. I guess I'm a little salty about just the overarching worldview that is inherent to that stuff. But I don't have any personal gripes with any specific academics. If anything, it's all of it coming together in this beautiful harmony and synthesis right now is just creating. Maybe this is dramatic, but I feel like it's an occult renaissance happening right now, and I think that many hands makes light work. I just felt compelled to offer, literally, in the most literal sense of the word, I felt compelled. I felt like something was pushing me into this, and finding my Achilles heels, and just using that, as mundane as it might be, using that to push me into this sphere. And I have attempted ever since to just kind of continually check in with that. Am I off track? Am I off base here? Am I putting too much of myself into it? And sometimes yes, and sometimes no. That's what I've found.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I think it resonates with me a great deal because of my own experience. I mean, I started out completely as a practitioner, and I had no real intention of going to university to study any of this stuff. And then I met a guy who was a Jesuit priest, and he was also very into esoterics. And I was so blown away by the breadth and depth of his knowledge on these subjects that I knew after talking with him for an hour, I was like, I got to go back to school, because the foundational knowledge that I have was so weak in comparison. He could was talking about history and philosophy and art and seamlessly weaving in knowledge about esoteric traditions and practices that were related to his statements about philosophy and art and history and things. And it became clear within moments that I was operating from a level of ignorance that was so profound that I really shouldn't have even been sitting at the table with him. And in that moment, I knew, I was like, oh, God, now I got to go back to school. Like, I'm too old for this. I don't even want to do it, but I don't have a choice now because he exposed me so badly. Not in a way that he was trying to like one up me or show me up, but just in like the conversation, I couldn't really keep up with him. And that was painful to me because I felt like I knew some things and that I hadn't been wasting my time, but yet I clearly didn't know as much or couldn't apply it in the same ways. And so it's not really fair to call him an academic because he was probably doing more practice than I was at that point, although probably in a different variety, certainly with a different emphasis. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, that was the end of it. So I had to go back to school. And I discovered the same kind of thing. There was this real hard divide between those who study the subject and those who are practitioners. And I could be wrong, but I felt like this sort of came out of like the study of anthropology where, you know, scholars would travel to distant lands to live with some tribe in the jungle and like learn their ways and their religion and their practices. And so, yeah, like in that context, like being a scholar and practitioner, that's kind of ridiculous because you're one thing, you're not the other. And to try to pretend to be both is just contrived and total bullshit. But when we're talking about Western esotericism with people who live in the same place, who act in the same way, have the same customs and traditions and language and all of it, that's a different story. And you're right. There's no way to study that and really understand it without doing it. And yet there's still this stigma about going native, if you will.
I like that.
You know, and I felt that even when I was doing my degree program. And fortunately, I was managed to meet up and connect with an advisor for my thesis who was fully of our mindset, and she was wonderful because she was able to bridge that gap pretty seamlessly. But she was also like the head of the comparative religion department at Harvard Divinity School, so she was like beyond reproach. And if I was like her disciple, then I was okay, and that made it all right. But if I had just tried to do that on my own, no way. They never would have gone for it. And to be honest, like once that ended and I graduated, it was really interesting because then the whole thing resurfaced when I tried to like explore career opportunities in academia. And the woman at the career office basically like laughed in my face and was like, you can't get a job with this degree and what you've studied. Like you can't get a job. Like, no.
Yeah.
Like you're barking up the wrong tree, buddy. So that was when I kind of like it hit home and I was like, okay, so now I've got the degree. I learned the stuff, but it's just personal enrichment. And so that was probably a good thing because then when I was presented with the opportunity again to go back for a PhD, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. That's a waste of my time. And I want to learn from someone who actually knows something instead of some people who study some books and then complicate their like argument about the subject, and like that's the extent of their exploration. Like they're not actually doing anything other than writing about something that they don't really know.
Right.
Which I hate to be so down on academics that aren't practitioners, but like that's just the fact of how it is.
Yes.
And they're okay with that, and I'm okay with it. Like I don't have a problem. They should stay on their side of the fence, and I'll stay on my side of the fence. Right. And that's how I feel about it now. I'm probably less open-minded and less willing to share the field with them than you might be. But
well, the thing is, I'm gonna be the guy that tries to go, let them speak first and then go, yes, and yes, and but wait, there's more, but that's the whole thing, right? It's just a gigantic funnel. You have, you take this idea of like a pyramid and you just turn it upside down. And that's really what's going on. At the widest point are the most amount of people. And they're going to trickle through. And the ones who really are called to, begin magic and be truly initiated in deed rather than word or ceremony, they're going to funnel through. And hopefully I'll be there to just pass them further along the funnel, because by no means am I the end all be all. I'm just this guy on, sort of aware of both sides of this equation. And it's interesting because I've become more erudite as I've gone deeper into magic. And one, because I understand the necessity to really connect with this as a tradition and understand where it comes from, what they were talking about, what they're really talking about, the difference between magic and spiritual evolution, because they're not the same thing. I've met through esoteric orders some of the most brilliant people that I've ever been, graced to have a conversation with. I work, closely with Yale seminarians and Oxford educated people who are initiates very quietly. But so while they kind of, or some of them apprentice under me for magic, I apprentice under them for checking in. Do I have this right? Am I out of my lane? Am I leaning too heavy here on where do I strike the balance between the historical and the personal? And that's been super helpful to have those people in my life kind of behind the scenes. But it's just something that I feel called to do. And I agree with you entirely. And I know that because of the internet and social media and the way it has radically altered our information systems and delivery mechanisms, I have no choice but to share the stage or field with them. But the thing is, like, okay, knowing what I know about how this shit works, what can I do to constantly be there, to just be there as a resource for people?
That's very kind and considerate of you, I think.
Well, so, I mean, somebody taught me, right? So, and it's not like I can go back and teach them at this point. So I just have to pay it forward. The thing is, my personal experience of magic, particularly when your personality is kind of gnarled by the postmodern worldview that we don't even realize is inculcated into us. It's like it's just there like air, and we just breathe it, and we have no idea how that forms our baseline a priori assumptions about everything that we kind of filter through our perspective lens. It's dangerous. And it's hard to start doing things involving, astral work, vision work, invocations and evocations, and start moving, your body's energy, your etheric energy, and things like this. And I guess in some cultures they call it chi or prana. But you're actually doing stuff. Now, the postmodern kind of secularization of everything you may think that you're just suspending your disbelief. But things are actually happening, whether you're willing to admit that or see that or not. And it in my own experience, can be hazardous to some degree. And so,
Oh yeah.
so I want to help people, and because they're doing it anyway, right? There's this strong admonishment to seek secret or silence and secrecy, and it's just the time for that stuff has clearly passed, because everything is everywhere, and obviously, like, you will only receive the information that you are able to process and accept and understand. But if people are taking like these, using grimoire magic, there are entire Reddit threads and forums for like kids doing, like goetic invocations. And it's just kind of like, well, maybe I shouldn't just sit here on the sidelines like an asshole. Maybe I should kind of just pipe up just a little bit, see what happens.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you talk about how like these worldviews, sort of like the modern secular worldview versus the magical esoteric worldview, neither of which are really fully articulated or considered by people who hold them, mostly. But they do really clash directly. It was interesting. I was reading the other day this book, Obscure Religious Cults, from like 1964, I think. And at the end of the introduction, the author, S.D. Gupta, he says, the world has changed a good deal in this 20th century of ours. Through the materialistic and positivistic tendencies of centuries, we have now learnt to care more for our material life than for anything higher and spiritual. The advancement of positive sciences, the growing keenness in the struggle for existence, the sternly acute problems of the grossly real life have turned the mind of the general mass away from the problems of the supramental reality. This life of flesh and blood, the apparently repulsive naked truths of the mysterious sphere, commonly known as the mind, the real weal and woe with which we are beset in our ordinary daily life, the suppressed pangs of depressed humanity, the injustice of the powerful, the suffering of the weak, inequity of the social machine, crashing of the innocent heart, triumph of the bourgeoisie, and the cry of the proletariat. These are the things that are engaging our whole attention. And these are the things which we think and feel, and the mysteries of which we try to give expression to. The influence of the continental literature and the closer contact of our life with the rapidly progressive life of the rising powers of the world around are rousing in us almost a craze for realism, and history must have its course. And it's
Incredible.
interesting because in this book, he's really talking about like the development of Hindu and Buddhist Tantra in Bengal, and the way that, like, in the time that he's actually writing about it, like he sees how people have their entire view of reality and their experience of it is so radically different than people 100 years prior, or 1,000 years prior, or 10,000 years prior. Like, and that's the world we've inherited now. And it's odd to read it because it sounds like he's describing our world right now, even though he wrote this like 80 some years ago. So I feel like the modern worldview and esoteric magical worldview are diametrically opposed. How do you reconcile that in yourself and with the people you deal with?
I say this kind of often, to the point where I'm sure it disturbs people, but I like the further along I get into esotericism, I realized that, like, The Empire Strikes Back, all of Yoda's lines are like so incredibly apropos. It's like, my God, they snuck esoteric philosophy into this little green Muppet. This is amazing. And so for me, I tell people, like, you have to unlearn all this stuff, unlearn what you have learned. The thing is, like, you don't have to abandon it. And the first step is kind of realizing what is going on in you, not exteriorizing everything, and really, really exteriorizing the locus of authority for your life. Which is, you cannot do that. You know, the thing is, like I've said it before on other podcasts, like you don't die with the facts, you die with your experience. And most of the time you look back and you realize I didn't have the facts to begin with.
Or I didn't even have the experience I should have.
Right. Exactly. You know, and so for me, it's this kind of, it's the process of leaving the cave, really, Plato's cave. You know, it's like when
But how do you leave the cave when you're the cave?
Well, the thing is, to me, and this is a complicated question. I think so. If you look at the allegory, and they're chained to the rock, and they're sitting there, and they're looking at the shadows on the wall. The thing that Plato describes as being the sort of salvific happenstance is that just the light from the sun, right, which he conceptualizes as to agathon, the good, it just a glint in the peripheries, and then they just kind of turn towards it. And I think that we are granted as human beings several what I would, I guess, call providential moments like that in our lives, and then we can either exercise our free will, or become, you know, go back to this deterministic cycle that is, you know, the shadows on the wall. And it takes bravery, because what's happening is you cannot, to me, I am a firm believer in there being an objective, capital T truth that underscores all of reality, and our, really, because it's the basis of our shared spiritual reality. And so that is going to be ever present. And it really, you know, I get very Platonic, because I mean, if anything, those were the first books I ever started reading, were the Platonic dialogues. I was a kid. My dad got them for me. You know, we're Greek. I don't know. He thought I was going to become a doctor reading that stuff. Instead, I dropped out, became a musician. So it kind of backfired. But you know, a lot of it talks about this underlying reality that, you know, is apparent. You know, it's something that it's I would say occulted, it's hidden, but it's there, it's discernible, you know. And there's this what Plato calls paideia, the education of the soul, which is coming to know the good, right? And that's what he calls the sun in the allegory of the cave, where it's like you're this providential moment where you see the glimpse of the reality of things. And what's happening is that you can never kill the truth. You know, you can never destroy the truth, because everything around us is predicated on it in one way or another. But what you can do is you can obscure your ability and other people's ability to perceive it, to recognize it for what it is. And I think that that's what's happening. And there is this software, this mental software that's being fundamentally installed in us, which is the modern worldview. And I think that you have to do your best to recognize that that's there. And so what form does that take in most people? Well, it comes in doubt, right? I mean, that's the first thing, is this, like, so what I find in a lot of students, particularly in the traditions in which I am a teacher, they come to certain traditions now because they want to be believers, but they want the tradition to prove them, to sort of give them a reason to believe in the things that they hope are real. And that, you know, that's not really what these traditions are for. They're not to prove anything to you. In fact, they're to sort of change you fundamentally. And if you're constantly projecting this, you know, maintaining this arm's length distance from this, you know, sort of process or these people or these writings or these philosophies and ideas, and you're just kind of doing this esoteric tourism, you're not going to get the alchemical change that's supposed to be happening. So you have to, what I tell people to do is, okay, learn to entertain both realities and give them their own domains of authority without automatically knee-jerk having to judge one as true, one as false, one as suspect. Now, that's not to lend yourself completely to incredulity, right? Like we don't want anybody to we're not talking about cult mentality or groupthink. We're not talking about allowing abuse to persist and those kind of relationships. But because I teach from a specifically, group oriented lineage, but even for solo practitioners and people out there that might be listening, and the main thing is to realize that like we've been drilled, we've been trained the way water trains grooves into rocks with this idea that things have to be one thing or another. And that to maintain for two things that are kind of diametrically opposed, as you're saying, to occupy the same space is cognitive dissonance and is kind of psychologically unhealthy. Well, that's all predicated on the idea that things have to be this or that to be true, and in reality, we do live in a realm where the truth is way more complicated than that. There are ways in which to say, to hold both things in front of you and not need to just suspend your judgment, not need to say, well, this is true. And then therefore, an a priori decision, this other thing can't be true. It doesn't really work like that in reality, So that's kind of the path that I try and tell people to espouse. And that to me is the beginning of learning balance. And balance is like anything else. I worked in PT for a while. And you'd ask people this is just an analogy really, but you'd ask people to stand up straight, and they kind of do this really
exaggerated.
Exactly. And it's because like that, that equilibrium can't be seen. It has to be felt. And so I think a large portion of this, I'm there to guide you and tell you these things from my experience. And using the occult axioms, right, of the marriage of the Apollonian and the Dionysian, of Hod and Netzach, of the rational and intuitive. But you have to walk that path. You have to find out where that balance lies for you at any given point.
Thank you. It's super interesting. You mentioned before we started that you are working on some writing, some books, and I'm wondering if you might share a little bit with us about that.
Sure. So currently I have two manuscripts that I'm working on. One is for publication in 2024, and one is for potential publication in the following year, 25. So the first one is with an independent publisher out of Arizona, Tria Prima Press. And I'm putting together a series of what are essentially essays on the Western esoteric traditions, which will introduce them from a practitioner basis and with the depth of insight that won't just cover the historical stuff, but the theoretical and the practical. That's kind of my whole thing, right? Since I started was history, theory, practice. So I want to sort of encompass that. And then the second book will be on what I am tentatively calling etheric magic. And so I do have training in Zen Buddhism and esoteric, some forms of esoteric inner alchemy, like Taoist energy work. I went to school for acupuncture and Chinese medicine. So a lot of the coursework was Qigong, and that kind of stuff. So I'm trying not to just simply graft Western symbolism and techniques onto what I know about what I have learned and experienced in the Eastern esoteric, systems, but rather really find and perceive the common ground and then inform to a degree Western magical practices and techniques based on those things, because I find that like they are, again, like we're talking a lot today about two sides of a coin or two parts of a whole, and they are two parts of a whole. There's so many incredible, like astounding similarities, not just in the history and the textual stuff, but in the experience. And so I'm working to formulate mostly the beginnings of a practical system of Western energetic sort of magic, I guess, if you want to call it that way. But it can also, it can also be used for spiritual development, and healing is like a huge thing, because that's really why I got involved with energy work in the first place, was to employ myself in a healing modality.
Nice. Well, I look forward to those. It sounds super interesting.
Thank you. Thanks, man. I love your work as well, and I really appreciate you just sitting and talking with me.
No, it's my pleasure. It's super interesting. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for coming on and sharing with us. And we felt like we really went pretty deep. And it's really a pleasure to be able to do that with you and share some of this, because there's so few people who are interested in these subjects and are able to discuss them at such a profound level. And I appreciate all that you do. And I'm looking forward to following your work more and seeing where you go, because I feel like you're just getting started.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest with you. And I look to guys like yourself and a lot of other credible authors and really just teachers, really, because that's also what you're doing when you write a book and when you curate a space for discussion like this. It's almost like an online version of the Academia, the ancient Platonic, sort of forum for discussion. Thank you for your work. And I'm really happy that you and I are friends now. It's been a real pleasure to have you on my podcast as well. So I was really taken aback when you invited me. I was super excited.
No, I definitely was I was really glad to make that connection. I appreciate you reaching out, and I'm looking forward to future conversations, and whatever happens, I'm sure it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. Thanks so much. And is there anything else you wanted to mention to people listening?
I guess I just reiterate the webpage, because that's basically where you can get everything. The podcast is up there. The latest YouTube lecture or presentation style video is right there. You can stream it. My blog is there. And then for anybody that wants to reach out and ask questions or talk about this stuff, there's a contact form there too. You can email me and stuff. I like to think of myself as somewhat accessible to a degree, So.
Yeah, I think you are. And I appreciate you offering that to people, because it's a big deal whether people take you up on it or not, or even appreciate the fact that you're willing to do that. It's a huge deal, because you're willing to share your time and energy with people that you don't even know, with no compensation, with nothing coming back your way, and you're just happy to help. So I think that's amazing. And
well, nothing financial coming back my way.
Yeah.
I feel like, that's why we're here, right? That's what we're here to do.
It is. You're right. But at the same time, it deserves to be recognized, because it's uncommon, and there's a level of compassion there that is worth appreciating. And
thank you.
So I
man.
appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this has been awesome.
In the Chamber of Reflection, Ike Baker delved even more deeply into his thoughts about esotericism in the modern age. And this part of the interview was dope, so please join us for that exclusive second half. Also, remember that we're in the midst of our Meditations on the Tarot study circle that is open to all Chamber of Reflection paid members. In October, we're meeting to discuss the Tower, and you should join us. And I want to remind you that although you're able to listen to this podcast at no charge, it costs time and money to create. We ask you to support our efforts and the creation of future podcasts by joining the membership section at chamberofreflection.com or subscribing via Patreon at patreon.com/Occult of Personality. As always, if you're already supporting the show or have done so in the past, my heartfelt thanks, and I salute you.